Marlon Brando told Clint Eastwood, "You're that kid with the gun. Same squint for 20 years. That's not acting, that's a poster." He said it in front of studio executives. He'd been calling Eastwood a product for years. A face that sold tickets, nothing more. When Eastwood responded with 6 words, it became one of the most legendary comebacks in Hollywood history. It was 1977, a conference room at Warner Brothers. Eastwood had just directed 4 films and wanted Brando for his next project, The Gauntlet. He thought he was sitting down with a legend to discuss a role. Brando thought he was sitting across from a television actor who got lucky with a poncho and the cigar. Part 2. What Brando really thought. Approximately 350 words. To understand why Brando said what he said, you need to understand what acting meant to him. Transformation. Complete destruction of the self. Cotton stuffed in cheeks to become Vito Corleone. A shaved head to become Colonel Kurtz. Every role demanded a new voice, a new body, a new soul. The old Hollywood stars disgusted him. They couldn't act their way out of a box of wet tissue paper, he once said. Called them breakfast cereal. On Wednesdays, we had Quaker Oats and Gary Cooper. On Fridays, we had Wheaties and Clark Gable. Same product on the same shelf, week after week. Eastwood was the worst of them all. Same poncho, same squint, same whisper. 15 years of it. The man with no name. Dirty Harry. Different movies, identical mask. No transformation, no suffering, no craft. At a dinner party years later, Brando told Eddie Murphy, "I can't stand that kid with the gun." Murphy didn't know who he meant. He's on the poster. The name of one of the biggest movie stars in the world, gone from Brando's memory. That's how little respect existed. But here's what Brando never understood. Eastwood wasn't trying to disappear into characters. Something else was being built. A presence, an economy of motion, a style where silence said more than speeches ever could. By 1977, the TV actor had become a director. 4 films, on time, under budget, never a wasted frame. Brando, late to every set, lines unmemorized, rewrites demanded, enemies made at every turn. A genius who burned everything he touched. Sitting across from a machine who never stopped showing up. Critics had been dismissing Eastwood for over a decade by then. Wooden, one note, not a real actor, just a face that happened to photograph well under a cowboy hat. The Dollars trilogy made him an icon overseas before America even noticed. Sergio Leone had plucked him from a dying TV western called Rawhide, paid him $15,000, and turned him into the man with no name. When those films finally hit American theaters, audiences went crazy. Critics shrugged. Dirty Harry changed the math. Suddenly, Eastwood wasn't just a spaghetti western curiosity. He was the biggest box office draw in Hollywood. 5 movies in a row that printed money. Studios couldn't get enough. Still, the critics sneered. Fascist, simplistic, a glorified model with a badge and a .44 Magnum. Eastwood heard it all. Never responded. Just kept working. What the critics missed, he'd started directing. High Plains Drifter in 1973, The Outlaw Josie Wales in 1976. Both films made money. Both films showed a mind at work behind the squint. The Gauntlet was next, an action picture about a washed-up cop escorting a witness across the desert while the entire Phoenix Police Department tries to kill them. Eastwood would direct and star. For the lead witness role, he wanted star power. Someone unexpected, someone who could elevate a B-movie premise into something memorable. Marlon Brando's name came up. On paper, it made sense. The biggest movie star of the 70s, paired with the most respected actor of his generation. A collision of styles that could generate real heat. Eastwood's people reached out. Brando agreed to a meeting. What Eastwood didn't know, Brando needed the work. The 70s had not been kind. After The Godfather and Last Tango in Paris, the roles dried up. The reputation for being difficult followed him everywhere. Directors whispered warnings to each other. Brando walked into that conference room carrying 15 years of resentment toward everything Eastwood represented. Eastwood walked in thinking he was about to make a deal. 5 years earlier, Brando had been untouchable. The Godfather in 1972 reminded the world why he mattered. That performance, the mumbling, the gestures, the way he held a cat while ordering men to their deaths, redefined screen acting overnight. Critics who had written him off suddenly called him the greatest of all time. again. Last Tango in Paris came next. Raw, controversial, the kind of film that sparked protests and think pieces and Oscar nominations all at once. Then, something broke. Brando refused his Academy Award for The Godfather, sent a woman named Sacheen Littlefeather to the podium instead, dressed in Apache clothing, to protest Hollywood's treatment of Native Americans. Half the audience booed, the other half didn't know what to do. Eastwood was backstage that night. Minutes later, he walked out to present Best Picture and made a crack about presenting the award on behalf of all the cowboys shot in John Ford Westerns. The room laughed. Brando, watching from home, did not. After that, the spiral accelerated. Brando gained weight, showed up to sets unprepared, refused to memorize dialogue, demanded cue cards taped to other actors' foreheads instead. Directors traded horror stories. Studios calculated whether his name was worth the chaos. By 1977, the phone had stopped ringing the way it used to. The man who transformed American acting couldn't get the roles he wanted anymore. Too expensive, too difficult, too unpredictable. So when Eastwood's people called about The Gauntlet, Brando's team listened. The money was decent, the shoot was short, and maybe, just maybe, working with the biggest box office star in Hollywood could remind people that Brando still existed. But pride is a difficult thing to swallow. Brando walked into that meeting needing Eastwood more than Eastwood needed him, and nothing made him angrier than that fact. The television actor who got lucky, the squinting mannequin with a gun, the breakfast cereal in human form. Now Brando had to sit across from him and pretend they were equals. The conference room sat on the Warner Brothers lot. Standard setup, long table, studio executives along the sides, water glasses nobody touched. Eastwood arrived first, on time as always. Brando arrived 20 minutes late. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just settled into his chair like he was doing everyone a favor by showing up. Small talk died quickly. The executives tried to keep things light, compliments about past work, enthusiasm about the project, the usual Hollywood dance. Brando barely engaged. Eastwood said even less. Then the conversation turned to the role. Eastwood laid out his vision. The Gauntlet was a lean picture, fast shoot, practical locations, a cop and a witness on the run, outgunned and outmanned, fighting their way across the desert. Brando started asking questions about the character's motivation, about the backstory, about scenes that weren't in the script but should be. Eastwood listened, answered in short sentences, kept things moving. But Brando wasn't interested in answers. Every question was really a statement. This script isn't good enough. This character isn't deep enough. This whole project isn't worthy of my time. The temperature in the room shifted. Executives glanced at each other. Nobody wanted to be the one to break the silence. Then Brando turned to Eastwood directly. "You know what your problem is?" Eastwood didn't respond, just waited. "You're that kid with the gun. Same squint for 20 years. That's not acting. That's a poster." The words hung in the air. A decade of private contempt finally spoken out loud, in front of witnesses, to his face. Brando kept going. Actors like Eastwood were the problem with Hollywood. Products instead of artists. Faces instead of performers. Men who showed up, hit their marks, and cashed checks without ever risking anything real. The executives froze. Nobody had ever talked to Clint Eastwood like this. Not on his own project, not in his own meeting. Everyone waited for the explosion. It didn't come. Eastwood sat perfectly still. No anger in his face. No defensiveness in his posture. Just silence. Then he leaned forward slightly. 6 words. Delivered without raising his voice, and the meeting was over. Silence filled the room. Executives stared at the table. Nobody wanted to make eye contact. Brando had just called Eastwood a fraud to his face, a poster, a product. 20 years of private contempt dumped on the conference table for everyone to witness. The greatest actor of his generation versus the biggest movie star in the world, and only one of them had thrown a punch. Eastwood's expression didn't change. No clenched jaw. No flash of anger, just stillness. The same stillness that made him a star in the first place. Then he leaned forward. "The kid's still standing. You're not." 6 words, barely above a whisper. Brando blinked. For a moment, nothing. Then something shifted behind his eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or the first flicker of understanding that he'd just lost a fight he thought he'd already won. Eastwood didn't explain, didn't elaborate. Didn't give Brando the argument he was looking for. Just pushed back his chair, stood up, and walked out. The meeting was over. The deal was dead. The gauntlet would get made without Marlon Brando. In the silence that followed, nobody moved. The executives sat frozen, unsure whether they just witnessed a negotiation collapse or something more permanent. Brando stayed in his chair for a long moment, then left without a word. They never spoke again. At the time, Eastwood's response sounded like an insult, a dismissal, fighting fire with fire. But it wasn't. It was a prophecy. Part 7. Brando walks away. Approximately 350 words. Days later, Brando's people called Warner Brothers. Creative differences. That was the official line. Everyone in Hollywood knew the truth. Word travels fast when two legends collide in a conference room full of witnesses. Brando couldn't do it. Couldn't show up on Eastwood's set every day, take direction from the man he'd just called a poster, and pretend nothing happened. His pride wouldn't allow it. The role went to Sandra Locke. The gauntlet got made on time and under budget, because that's how Eastwood worked. Critics dismissed it as another B-movie action picture. Audiences showed up anyway. The film made money. Brando never mentioned the meeting publicly, not in interviews, not in his autobiography, not once. But privately, the resentment only grew. That dinner with Eddie Murphy happened a few years later. I can't stand that kid with the gun. Still couldn't say the name. Still burning over a slight that existed only in his own mind. Because here's the thing Brando never admitted to himself. Eastwood hadn't insulted him, hadn't called him washed up, hadn't attacked his talent or his legacy. 6 words. A statement of fact. The kid's still standing. You're not. No argument to win. No comeback to deliver. Just a mirror held up at the worst possible angle. Brando spent the rest of his career running from that reflection. The phone kept not ringing. The roles kept getting smaller. The reputation for being impossible kept growing. Meanwhile, Eastwood made another film, then another, then another. Same squint, same whisper, same machine that never stopped moving. What happened to both men over the next 2 decades proved Eastwood right in ways nobody in that conference room could have predicted. After 1977, the collapse came slowly, then all at once. Apocalypse Now in 1979 should have been a comeback. Brando showed up to the Philippines overweight, unprepared, and demanding script changes. Francis Ford Coppola nearly lost his mind trying to salvage something usable. The footage that made it into the film, Brando mumbling in shadows, head shaved, barely visible, became iconic almost by accident. Critics called it genius. Coppola called it a nightmare. That became the pattern. Flashes of brilliance surrounded by chaos. Every director who worked with Brando in the 80s told the same story. The talent was still there, buried under layers of difficulty and self-destruction. The roles got smaller. Paychecks became the only motivation. A cameo here, a forgettable thriller there. Films nobody remembers today. Brando retreated to his island in Tahiti, bought it years earlier with Godfather money, dreamed of building a paradise away from Hollywood. Instead, it became a hiding place, gained weight, stopped caring about appearances, let the myth of Marlon Brando replace the man entirely. Then came the tragedies no fame could shield him from. His son Christian shot and killed the boyfriend of Brando's daughter, Cheyenne. The trial became a media circus. Christian went to prison. Brando testified on his behalf, weeping on the stand, a broken father begging for mercy. The same man who once terrified audiences as Stanley Kowalski, now just an old man watching his family destroy itself. 5 years later, Cheyenne hanged herself at her mother's home in Tahiti. She was 25. Brando never recovered. The final years were spent in isolation, health failing, weight ballooning past 300 pounds, friends drifting away one by one. July 1st, 2004. Marlon Brando died of respiratory failure in a Los Angeles hospital. Alone. No funeral service. No memorial. His ashes were scattered partly in Tahiti, partly in Death Valley. The greatest actor of his generation, gone. Legacy complicated by tragedy, ego, and all the roles he never got to play. The kid with the gun was still making movies. After 1977, the collapse came slowly, then all at once. Apocalypse Now in 1979 should have been a comeback. Brando showed up to the Philippines overweight, unprepared, and demanding script changes. Francis Ford Coppola nearly lost his mind trying to salvage something usable. The footage that made it into the film, Brando mumbling in shadows, head shaved, barely visible, became iconic almost by accident. Critics called it genius. Coppola called it a nightmare. That became the pattern. Flashes of brilliance surrounded by chaos. Every director who worked with Brando in the 80s told the same story. The talent was still there, buried under layers of difficulty and self-destruction. The roles got smaller. Paychecks became the only motivation. A cameo here, a forgettable thriller there. Films nobody remembers today. Brando retreated to his island in Tahiti, bought it years earlier with Godfather money, dreamed of building a paradise away from Hollywood. Instead, it became a hiding place. Gained weight, stopped caring about appearances, let the myth of Marlon Brando replace the man entirely. Then came the tragedies no fame could shield him from. His son Christian shot and killed the boyfriend of Brando's daughter Cheyenne. The trial became a media circus. Christian went to prison. Brando testified on his behalf, weeping on the stand, a broken father begging for mercy. The same man who once terrified audiences as Stanley Kowalski, now just an old man watching his family destroy itself. 5 years later, Cheyenne hanged herself at her mother's home in Tahiti. She was 25. Brando never recovered. The final years were spent in isolation, health failing, weight ballooning past 300 pounds, friends drifting away one by one. July 1st, 2004, Marlon Brando died of respiratory failure in a Los Angeles hospital. Alone, no funeral service, no memorial. His ashes were scattered partly in Tahiti, partly in Death Valley. The greatest actor of his generation, gone. Legacy complicated by tragedy, ego, and all the roles he never got to play. The Kid with the Gun was still making movies. Part 10, Who Was Right? Approximately 350 words. 2 philosophies, 2 careers, 2 completely different endings. Brando believed acting meant transformation, suffering, tearing yourself apart to become someone else. Every role demanded sacrifice. Physical, emotional, spiritual. Anything less was fraud. Eastwood believed acting meant presence, stillness, knowing exactly who you are and letting the camera find it. No need to disappear into characters when the character you've built is strong enough to carry any story. Hollywood sided with Brando for decades. The method became gospel. Actors tortured themselves for roles, gaining weight, losing weight, staying in character for months, alienating everyone around them in service of the craft. Eastwood never played that game. Same squint, same efficiency, same refusal to suffer for the approval of critics who would never respect him anyway. So, who was right? Look at the scoreboard. Brando made roughly 40 films in 6 decades, a handful of masterpieces, long stretches of forgettable work, final years marked by embarrassment and tragedy. Eastwood directed over 40 films alone, plus dozens more as an actor. 4 Oscars, billions at the box office. Still working at 94 years old. A body of work so large it takes days to get through. Brando chased perfection and burned out. Eastwood chased consistency and outlasted everyone. Maybe Brando was right about craft. Maybe transformation is the higher art. Maybe Eastwood never reached the peaks that Brando hit in Streetcar, or The Godfather, or Last Tango. But peaks don't matter if you can't survive the valleys. Brando had the talent of a god and the discipline of a child. Eastwood had the talent of a professional and the discipline of a soldier. One approach leaves behind a complicated legacy and a cautionary tale. The other leaves behind a library. Genius means nothing without longevity. Talent means nothing without showing up. The greatest performance in the world doesn't matter if you destroy yourself before you can give another one. Eastwood understood something Brando never did. Part 11, The Lesson. Approximately 300 words. The kid's still standing. You're not. 6 words that sounded like an insult in 1977 turned out to be a life philosophy. Brando wanted to be the greatest, chased brilliance like it was the only thing that mattered. Found it a few times, then spent the rest of his life wondering why it wasn't enough. Eastwood wanted to be the last one standing. Never chased brilliance, never begged for respect. Just showed up, did the work, and let time sort out who mattered. One man burned bright and burned out. The other became a monument. There's a lesson here that goes beyond Hollywood, beyond acting, beyond any single career. Talent gets you in the room. Discipline keeps you there. And longevity, real longevity, comes from knowing which battles to fight and which ones to ignore. Brando fought everything: studios, directors, critics, his own body, his own family, spent decades swinging at shadows until there was nothing left. Eastwood fought nothing, took the criticism, ignored the insults, let smaller men have their opinions, while he kept building something they couldn't tear down. The greatest actor of his generation died alone, overweight, broken by tragedy, remembered as much for his decline as his genius. The kid with the gun is still making movies at 94, still showing up, still standing. That conference room in 1977 held two visions of what a career could be. Two paths through an industry designed to chew people up and spit them out. Brando chose fire. Eastwood chose ice. Only one of them is still here to tell the